Today we're going to think about working with teenagers. In fact, I was asked to talk about having fun with teenagers, and I thought, well, I have 3 teenagers of my own and another teenager that lived with me for 3 years. That shouldn't be too much trouble. My first thought turned to the different activities that we've done with our children. In fact, this summer we had decided that since our parents, well, at least my mother is still alive and my husband's parents are still alive, that we would go with them someplace so that our children would have memories of the grandparents, since we do live many miles from them and usually can only see them about twice a year. So we had asked my mother, and she said, well, she would like to take the children to Epcot Center and to Disney World, and we did go there, and we had a wonderful time, and my children enjoyed it, and we felt a real closeness with my mother. And then with my husband's parents, we had gone to Charleston, South Carolina, and it was a lot of fun. And I thought, well, maybe this is what we have in mind. And then I thought, well, we certainly couldn't afford to do this every summer. And what else could we do? Just one time of year, is that all the fun that we have? And I remembered one summer when we couldn't afford to take a trip of this nature, that we decided to take one afternoon a week. And during the summer, and this would be our mini vacation. And at that time, our children were younger, and we hadn't lived in the Chicago region for very long. And we took one afternoon, and one day we would go to the Natural History Museum, and one day we rode the subway to downtown Chicago and had a picnic just in the park right outside the subway station. And another day we drove to the lake and let the children walk along the beach and see the waves and so forth. But that was a fun time that summer, and the children didn't have just one week to look forward to. They looked forward to something every single week, and maybe that would be something you could do. Maybe you don't have a subway station near your home, or maybe you don't have all the museums that we have in Chicago, but there's something. And for children, it's not how big it is or how really impressive it is. It's the fact that you take time to spend your time with them. I was thinking probably the best thing of all the activities you could do with children, or with anybody for that matter, is being willing to give of yourself and spend time with them. Now, teenagers probably will not say a lot, well, thank you so much for spending time with me, but it will make a difference in your relationship. I found that times when my teenagers need me is many times a time when I feel that my own activities should have priority, but in the past I found that if I let those opportunities pass, then when I have time, they're busy. As I thought back, the games that I played with the children, I have two sons who are playing basketball, and I'm not a very good basketball player, but if they can't get anyone else, then they even want me to play basketball with them. And I remember last winter we were shoveling the snow off the basketball court and playing basketball. But I think those times I look back, and I think the teenagers will remember. I remember shopping trips with my daughters. You don't have to have money to go shopping, and we've gone so many times and looked at so many things and have come home empty-handed. But yet that shopping time is a fun time, and it says to your teenager, we don't have much money, and maybe I can't buy you a lot, which is true in our case, but I love you enough that I care to spend time and look at things with you. And many times on shopping trips, we just go and look at the ready-made clothes so that we can get ideas to go home and make it ourselves. But those are fun times. I was thinking, well, I could go through and list a lot of things like this, and as I talk, I will be listing them. But I looked back and I thought, what in my parents' life? Now, what do I remember as a child that has made a lasting impression in my life? And maybe right now you'll think, now what do I remember that my parents did, especially if you had a Christian home and if you had parents that loved you and spent time with you, which I certainly did. And I was thinking, the things that I remember in my childhood, which was quite a long time ago, was my father. My father loved to sing. He was the song leader in the church all during my childhood, and he had not had any musical training, but he loved the singing. He loved especially the old hymns of the faith. And I remember every night when the weather was warm, and in Tennessee the weather stayed warm quite many months of the year, we would all go and sit in the yard. And those were in the days before television, and really, in a small town, there wasn't much to do. So we would all just go and sit in the yard, and I remember singing songs every night. My father then, as we sat there, we would talk, and then we would sing. And since it was dark, nobody had a songbook, we would sing all the hymns that we knew. And even to this day, when I'm singing hymns in church, I find that I know most all the words to the songs, not because I've tried to memorize them or because, I'm just a good Christian, but because my father instilled singing those songs over and over and over again have given me a rich heritage. And I know many of the older songs have a tremendous spiritual message for you. And sometimes when I've really needed help and guidance, then a verse of a song will come back to me. And that's something my father has given me, even though he's been in heaven now for several years. I remember making ice cream every Sunday afternoon. I know we lived in a small country town in Tennessee, and most people didn't visit during the week. My father was not a farmer, but many of the people that we knew were farmers. And the only day that you really got dressed up was on Sunday. You would go to church and then have lunch, and then you would go and visit someone. So I remember many Sunday afternoons, our relatives would come over, and we would make ice cream, or we would play badminton, or we would play croquet in the front yard, or just talk or sing songs. And those times I remember as fun times. I remember in the winter many times making taffy, and I don't know, maybe that's gone out, but it's really a messy job, but I would have my teenage friends over, and my parents, again, were very strict with me. I could not just go driving around in cars, but they were always willing to have any teenagers over to my house. And as I think, at the time, I didn't appreciate it, just like you teenagers don't appreciate it and don't realize how much food that teenagers can consume in a very short time if they're there at your house. But I remember Mother always had something for us to eat, and then she was always willing for us to move back the furniture if we were playing games. She was always willing for us to go to the kitchen and make popcorn and pull taffy. And I do remember we got so much taffy on the floor, and it was so sticky that the rule after that was if you make taffy, you have to cover the kitchen floor with newspaper, and then at least we can just pick up the newspaper when they're gone, and we don't have to scrub the floor. But as I think back, those were fun times, and those are, maybe your children would say, oh, I don't want to do that, but if we would really show them that it can be fun. The world has shown us so much, and so many things that, of course, we would not want to do because we love Christ and want Him first in our life, that we've let, in many ways, I'm afraid, the world make us afraid to suggest something else to our teenagers rather than the music and the movies and the thrills that the world has to offer, which, by the way, even if it does offer a temporary thrill, there's nothing lasting involved there. And I was thinking, now, can I think of a time in the Bible where God talked about having fun? And I thought, and really, I could not come up with, I know that God is for fun, and personally, I like to have fun more than anybody, and have good times, especially with our family. I know in our family we make a big deal about birthdays. We decorate the house. We have special treats and cakes and so forth. Not spending a lot of money, but doing special things. We have special meals that we fix for each person. And my daughters, of course, are cooking now, and they like to prepare meals for us. But I was thinking, what does God say about having fun with teenagers? And I thought, and the only verse that really came to my mind, well, it doesn't really deal with fun, but it's in Deuteronomy 6, and I know you've read this before, but I'd just like to share a few words from it. It says, "And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart." Now, what were these words? And as I look back, it goes back to verse 5 of Deuteronomy 6, and it says, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might." And then he goes on to say in verse 7, "And thou shalt teach them diligently." Those are the words, loving God with all our heart, soul, and might, "to our children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." And I thought, that must be getting close to what we're looking for, because our children will have fun doing the things that they see us having fun doing. I remember my husband telling this story many times since I've known him. My husband was raised with good parents that loved him and that loved the Lord, but he was raised in a very formal church. And I remember him saying that he was taken to church, but as he looked around, he noticed that his parents didn't seem to like going. They went because it was you were supposed to go, and it was almost like his weekly dose of spiritual castor oil. You opened your mouth and took it, but you certainly didn't like it. And so as soon as he left home to go to college, he decided, well, no one's here making me go to church, and so I've had enough of all that, and so he stopped going. In fact, he said, well, I don't even know if there's a God. I don't even know if the Bible is true, and so I'll see how I get along without God, without the Bible, without church, without anything, because no one's here making me go. Now, personally, I don't want my children to have that attitude, and no matter how tired I am, we've tried to teach our children that church is important, and if we really love God, we'll make it important. Whether we're on a family vacation, we'll stop and take time to go to church, or whether, no matter what we're doing, we'll always go. I was thinking, since my husband was telling that story, I thought back to my childhood, and again, I had parents who loved the Lord and who knew it was important to go to church. I cannot ever remember a time when I didn't go to church, but more than that, I remember that my parents really loved it. As I mentioned before, my father led singing, and when he led the singing, you could tell that he loved the Lord and loved the words of the songs that he was singing. I remember all through my childhood, if the door was open to the church, we went, whether it was a revival or a singing, or a regular Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, a special prayer meeting, an RAs, a GA, whatever was meeting there, we went, because church was the most important, and God was the most important thing in our life and our family. I remember when I went away to college, and I did go to a Christian college, but not one that required church attendance. And when I got there, I remember the first Sunday I went up and down the halls and asking to see if anyone was going to Sunday school, because if you've gone to Sunday school and church for 18 years, you really feel like that you should go. In fact, I was always afraid not to go. And so as I went up and down the halls asking, well, I guess they thought it was you were grown up and cool if you didn't go. So nobody seemed to be going. And I remember a few of the girls said, well, I think we'll catch church at 11. And I thought, oh my, I wonder what my dad would say to that. But I thought, well, nobody else is going. I feel kind of silly walking down there all by myself. I'll just go and catch church at 11. So I went back to my room and got in bed. And all of a sudden, I remembered how disappointed my parents would be if they knew that I was just sitting there in bed when I should be in church. And then I remembered that God was a God to be feared, and I knew that he had commanded me to go to church, and that I had been taught that, and I was responsible for going. So I got up and went to Sunday school and went to church. And I'm really glad I did. And it was not because I was a better Christian than any of the other girls in our dorm. And it wasn't because I was trying to be more spiritual than any other girls. It was because I had a father and mother who truly loved God and taught me from the time I was an infant that when it's Sunday morning at 9:30 or whatever time Sunday school starts, then you do go to church. And it's a fearful thing if you don't love God enough to obey him. And ever since that time, church attendance has been a part of my life. And again, I'm thankful to my parents for that. I remember probably the first part of this year, we were trying to think, how can we do something as a family in church? And of course, we always went to church, and we were active in all the soul winning groups and that type of thing. But someone had asked my husband to consider doing an Oriental church. This would be during our preaching service on Sunday morning, and these children were brought to our church on buses from Chicago. Many of them were just learning English. They were Vietnamese, Cambodian, Chinese, all different Oriental races. And we really felt that our first reaction was, oh no, we're doing enough already. Let somebody else do that. And then my husband began to pray about it. And we talked to our children about it. And about this time, my oldest daughter started visiting on every Saturday some of the Oriental children in Chicago, and of course visiting for many hours a day. Usually she would be gone at least 8 hours on Saturday visiting the children. And as she came home, we would talk to us about some of the children and the fact that most of the families that came here came with nothing, just the clothes on their backs, and were, in fact, they called America heaven. Most of them being Buddhists, they didn't really know too much about heaven, but they thought America was heaven because, of course, they would have freedom here to live and worship and do as they chose. And so we could see that Kelly had a real burden for these Oriental children. And as my husband prayed, he said, well, I believe that God would have me do this. So we decided that we'd make this a family project. And now we have, every Sunday we usually have between, 75 and 100 or more Oriental children, and we work with them. And I know since they have absolutely no background in the Bible, we can't just stand and tell them Bible stories as I would tell a group of children, like my own children. We have to, most of them have never heard of any of the characters in the Bible. Some of them don't know or have heard of Jesus. They do not know anything about David or Goliath or Samson or any of the people that that I was taught since I was a baby. And so instead of trying to just tell them all these times, my husband tells the story and then we act it out. And my children are then members of this, always act out the skits. And we've had more fun with this. We don't do elaborate things, but I know last week my two sons were David and Goliath, and we acted that out, and the children just loved it, and they keep saying they are fascinated by the stories, and we trust that in the process of time that many of them will come to know Christ, as some of them already have. And not only that, but they will see that the Bible is more than just a storybook, but it's something that will be help them to know how to live in this new country. And so that was well worth it. And I know that this experience has drawn our family closer together as we pray for these children together, and as we see them week by week grow. It's a bond between us. The family altar is something that my husband has that is exciting. And let me say this, there's nothing the devil fights more than destroying your family altar. I know we tried, at first when we tried it, it was so hard and things kept coming up. And there were so many obstacles. You'd think, well, I just don't think it's worth the effort. Let everybody read the Bible on their own. But yet my husband said, no, this is important. Everybody should have their own Bible reading, but we have to do this as a team. And now I find that it's hard to get through the day without our family sitting together, and we don't spend a lot of time. I say usually not more than 15 minutes, but it's a time when we read the Bible, when we pray for burdens that are on our hearts. And again, it's a fun, I don't know if you think it's hilarious time, but yet that it's a real bond that draws us close together. I was thinking back as a child, I had an aunt and uncle who, now my parents did not have family altars. They were good people and loved the Lord, but I never remember having a family altar. But I had an aunt and uncle who did, and I remember they had a daughter my age, and I used to go to their house all the time. And I remember every time I'd go there, we would always he would read the Bible, and then we would all pray. And that really was impressive to me. Not that there was anything just spectacular, but I could feel, you knew the Lord was there. And I don't think it's any accident that all four of their sons are now pastoring churches, and their daughter has married a man who is very active in church work. In fact, all of them are, and that's no accident. I think as I was thinking too, I thought, if I keep God first in my life, I want my home to reflect Christ. And I want my children to see that God really can meet all of our needs and solve our problems. And I was thinking back, there are many examples where this was not true. As I think about Lot lost his children because he chose to live in Sodom rather than keeping God first in his life. In fact, the whole city of Sodom would have been spared if Lot had just won his own children to the Lord. I was thinking about Eli's sons were disgraceful to him, and of course, God took care of that. I was thinking about Samuel's sons were unfit to be prophets, and because of that, God allowed the people to have a king. And so I certainly want to live in such a way that my home is a reflection of Christ. And only God can do this. I remember praying years ago, "Dear Lord, please make my home such that no matter who's here, that our home will be a reflection of Christ." And at that time, I remember I liked having company, but I was glad when they went home, because when you have companies, especially those that stay overnight, you find it hard to be nice all the time. And I remember many times they would be there a day or two, and I was ready to yell at my children. I was ready to glare at my husband, and I was ready to put on my old robe, and I couldn't do it when they were there. And so I thought, well, I wish they'd go home because I'm uncomfortable. But yet God began to show me that if Christ is really the Lord of our house, that no matter who's there, it'll be the same. And really, there's no time when I should be yelling at my children and glaring at my husband. If my priorities are right, that means keeping God first and my husband in second place and my children next and my home in order, that I really shouldn't mind who God should happen to send by. In fact, the Bible has commanded us to be given to hospitality. I didn't write the references down, but I think at least 4 times in the Bible God says to be given to hospitality. And so I began to pray. I said, "Oh, dear Lord, please make our home one that people can truly see Christ." And I know on the door, right after that, someone gave us a little sign that says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And it's been on our door, I don't know, probably at least 12 years. And we want everyone that comes in our door, whether we know them or not, to realize that Christ is the Lord of our home. And I think that as you have this attitude, I know it was amazing how that if I resented people coming and if I was bothered by them, then before long I could tell that my children were also having the same type of feelings, because our children do more of what we do than what we say. And I know over and over I'm reminded that you can never really take anyone farther than you yourself have gone. And so if there is a weakness in your own life that you can't have control over, then probably this same weakness is going to show up in the lives of your children. So anyway, I remember praying, "Dear Lord, please make our home one that people can see Christ and will always be ready to welcome people." And I know about 2 weeks ago, and God always finds a nice way to see if you mean what you say. Now, over the years, we've had many people. I remember 2 weeks ago, I came home from taking my daughter to singing practice, to her singing group practice. And when I got there, my husband was walking out to the car, and I thought, well, that's a little unusual. I wonder if one of the children is sick or someone's gotten hurt or hit something. And what he was doing was preparing me for the fact that he had invited a family and all their children to stay with us for a while. And like you, immediately I thought, how does the house look? Because I had no idea when I left that anyone was coming. But yet I knew that my husband had asked them, so it had to be God's will. And it turned out it was a tremendous blessing to have them there. And God worked it out so they found a place to live and found jobs. And it was exciting because God let us have a part in their lives for just that short period of time. And over, we have been blessed so much more by the people that came into our home than by them being blessed by our having them there. And I just hope from that. Now, I don't sit my children down every day and lecture them on the importance of people in our house, but I know that they're willing. I know my daughters, they're willing to give up their bedrooms and sleep on the floor and or sleep together in sleeping bags, because they know that we don't ask anyone unless we feel like it's God's will for our lives. And so that's just another thing that God is still teaching me. I can't say, especially that Monday night, I have to admit I wasn't that excited. I was really tired, and I thought, oh goodness, but yet God is gracious and gives us time to change our mind and forgives us when we have the wrong attitude. I remember too that the other verse that came to my mind, the first one was loving God with all our heart, and not only that, but somehow living in such a way that we can transfer this to our children and show our children that it's fun to serve the Lord, that that being a Christian is not some dull, drab thing, but it's something that really is fun and that you can do. The other verse that really came to my mind was Proverbs 22:6, and again, probably all of you know that, but it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he'll not depart from it." And what does teaching and training mean? It simply means to teach a child to fear God, or teach ourselves to fear God. In fact, to be afraid if we're not doing what the Bible says, and be afraid if we're not keeping His commandments and doing what He has to say. And you know, God has a purpose for everything He tells us to do. I've found that since I've given my life to the Lord completely, that I'm so much happier than we ever were when, even though I was a Christian back in the early years of our marriage, we're seeking happiness and not totally in the world, but yet trying to go to dinner groups and plays and all those and many things of the world, trying to find happiness, and none of it ever brought happiness. And again, trying to live today like we want our children to live tomorrow. I was thinking that my mother, when I was first married, always lectured me on soap operas. And personally, I'm not a TV person. It never has meant a lot to me. But I know my mother always say, now, don't get in the habit of watching soap operas because it'll just waste all the time and it gives you the wrong thoughts and so forth. And that was the instruction. But as I got away from my mother and had my own home, I remember there was one soap opera that I used to watch. And I would, instead of wasting time, I guess I salved my conscience by always bringing my clothes in. I'd say, oh, I'm going to fold my clothes, and I'll watch the soap opera, and then I'm not wasting time. And I put my little girl to bed, and so everything was fine. And every day I would tune in for 30 minutes, then tune it out. But I remember, this has been years ago, that one day my little girl, got too old to take a nap. In fact, she wasn't tired anymore, and they all reach a stage. And I remember I got my clothes out, and I turned on the TV, and I put her in her room, and all of a sudden she said, I'm not tired today. I want to come out and help you fold clothes. And I said, well, it's time for your nap. Just go in there and get in bed. And, of course, I trained her to obey, so she went on in there and got in bed. And I walked back, and I sat down, and then I thought, why did you care if she came out and helped you fold clothes? And I thought, why? And I guess it was really the Holy Spirit who was asking this question instead of me. And I had to admit that it's because I didn't want her to see what I was seeing and hear what I was hearing on that show. And so I didn't say it aloud, but in my mind that I thought that. And then God said, or the Holy Spirit, or my conscience, or whoever it was, said, well, if you don't want her to watch it and hear it, then probably you shouldn't be watching and hearing it either. And so I walked over and turned off the TV and got my daughter, and we folded clothes together. And I can honestly say that's the last soap opera I've watched, and I can again honestly say that without a doubt, I know that it is not God's will for me to fill my mind with the filth of the world and the philosophy of the world. And I have my daughter to thank for that. And I think we could stop and apply this to almost every area in our life. If whatever we want our children to do and to be, that's what we should be asking God to help us to do and to be. I remember a verse that's meant a lot to me in Philippians 4:9. Paul is talking, and he says to the Philippians, those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. So if we are doing the right things, not only will God bless our lives, but He will give us a peace. And of course, this is a peace that the world can never have with all of their thrills and their excitement. I was thinking too, this summer, some of the most fun things that I remember doing with my children involve work. A long time ago, I decided that the most important thing for my children was to know the Lord. And if I had it to do over again, I would start praying from the time they were born that I could introduce them to the Lord. Now, I did give all my 4 children, to the Lord when they were born and asked the Lord to give me wisdom to know how to raise them. But several years later, after 2 of my children were already saved, and I remember hearing the speaker say, you should pray every day that God will allow you to lead your children to the Lord. And so my husband and I were able to lead the last 2 to the Lord. And that's a special blessing that God will give you, I think, if you ask. But I was thinking, I want my children both to know the Lord, and I want them to have character. What is character? Simply doing the right thing, doing the right thing over and over and over again, so that they do it almost without thinking. Now, I think it's easier if you start when they're young, and I tried to start when my children were younger. But yet, if you haven't started already, it's never too late. The Bible says with God, all things are possible. And so I wanted to show my children that work is really fun, and that really you can have as much fun working as you can playing. And I remember that when I was a child, since my parents both worked part of the time at least, then on Saturday my mother would leave a list, and I know that I would mark off everything she had on it. If it was wash dishes, I would wash the dishes and mark it off. And if it was make the beds, I'd make the beds and mark it off. And whatever else she had on there, I would always mark it off. And that was always exciting to me, to have everything done and have everything marked off by the time she got back. But I remember my brother he used to think it was a challenge. I thought it was a challenge to see if I could do everything. My brother seemed to think it was a challenge if he could figure out how not to do things. At least it seemed like that to me. And I remember that my mother would say to me, wash dishes. And then on his list would be dry dishes. And so I would wash the dishes, and I would call him in. I'd say, come in and dry the dishes. He'd come in and he'd say, they're drying. And what he meant was he was going to leave them sitting there in the rack, and then right before my mother came home, he would rush in and put them away. Now, that wasn't what I had in mind that he should do, but as it turned out, it was okay. There was no rule against it, and he always had them put away before my mother came home. And I thought, well, children need to have certain requirements. Children are happier. No child is happy if they have nothing to do. No teenager is happy if they can play all the time, because pretty soon you run out of things to do. Teenagers are not. Now, also, most teenagers of mine will not come and say, what can I do? I'm bored. Give me a job. No, that's not the way it works. But yet I found that you give them a job, and then you let them do it. Let them choose their time in a way that they will do it. I know this summer we have had a rule that our teenagers, the girls would work 4 hours a day. Now, to me, it seemed easier that we should just set up a schedule. They would get up a certain time, and then that they would work from 8 to 12 and then be free the rest of the day. And that seems like a good idea. But yet, I found after a few days that they weren't real happy with that. And so I said, and I think you can too, ask your children if they don't seem happy with something. Then ask. Now, just because you're asking for their opinion doesn't mean you have to do it, but at least it gives them lets them know that you're willing to listen. So I said, all right, what would you suggest? And they said, well, we'll work 4 hours, but we would like to be able to choose the hours that we work. And so I said, fine, I'll give you the jobs, and you fit it in to the time that you like. And that's worked great. Now, a time or two, I've noticed that many times they would be putting off their work, and then one of their friends would call up and say, hey, can you go shopping at the mall? And then they would come and say, do you mind? And I said, no, as long as your 4 hours is done, then you can go. And they would have to rush back and finish their 4 hours before they could go. But yet, I wasn't saying to them, you can't go shopping. You have to work. They knew that they had made the choice, and that they knew that it was up to them to fulfill their obligation. And that's worked out really well. I know, I was thinking, we decided we painted a lot of rooms in our house this summer. And when my teenagers said, we want to paint, of course, they painted some, but not a whole lot. And my first reaction was that, why don't you do the laundry and housework, and I'll do the painting, because it can be super messy, and you have to be careful not to get it in the carpeting. But I thought, well, maybe someday soon, they'll need to know how to paint. And they'll have a home of their own, and I want them to know how to do things. And so I thought, all right, we'll paint. We'll take turns. And so we we spent several days in painting. I noticed that because I did let them. Now, if they drip paint, I let them clean it up. But they did. Pretty soon they could do just as well as I was doing. And so we were painting. In fact, I noticed that as we got around, they wanted to finish the room. And so they said, well, we'll just work double today and not work it all tomorrow, just so we can finish the room. And I thought that was really great. And as we finished the room and got it all back together, I know that I feel like they had a special feeling of pride in the home because they knew that they had helped with that. I know my husband is building a shed, and my teenage son has been helping him. And I know that he waits every day till my husband gets home from work just so he can go out and start working on the shed. And we don't think of those things as thrilling and fun things, but yet those are things that I know that have drawn us closer together in the summer, and that will be helpful to my teenagers as they go out and have their own homes. You think, well, my teenager doesn't want to do anything, and I'll have to admit, mine don't always want to do it either. I don't ask them if they feel like. I don't go to each room each morning and say, now, do you feel like working 4 hours today? No, I just assume that's our rule. You work 4 hours a day, and we're consistent in seeing that it's worked. God has told us in 2 Thessalonians 3:10 that if any would not work, neither should he eat. And we've always had that philosophy. If our teenagers should decide tomorrow that they would do no work, then my feeling would be they would not eat until they resumed their 4 hours a day. Now, they accept this willingly because this has always been our rule. Our children have always worked since they were small. But maybe you're just starting this, then you'll have to be consistent. And by the way, consistency is always, to me, the hardest trait to achieve for any parent. Just the time when you need to be consistent is the very time when you're tired. If our teenagers should decide tomorrow that they would do no work, then my feeling would be they would not eat until they resumed their 4 hours a day. Now, they accept this willingly because this has always been our rule. Our children have always worked since they were small. But maybe you're just starting this, then you'll have to be consistent. And by the way, consistency is always, to me, the hardest trait to achieve for any parent. Just the time when you need to be consistent is the very time when you're tired, when you have your own problems to deal with, but yet consistency always pays off and shows your child that character is built by doing what you're required to do and doing it well. And if you don't do it well, then you get to come and do it over again. I know for years we've had this rule in our house. Now we have 2 girls and myself, and they wash the dishes. But we've always had a rule that all the girls help with the dishes. And I know for a while, as the girls got older and they had more things to do, I noticed that since we usually talk at the evening meal and we exchange things that happened during the day, that many times they would want to go off and do something while we were still sitting there and talking. And then I found that when the dishes were to be done, all of a sudden I might be the only one there to do the dishes. And somehow I did not like to go up and call everybody to do the dishes since that's their job. So we made this rule that if you don't come when the dishes are ready to be washed, then the next meal you get to do them all by yourself. And a time or two I had to do that. I would just go in and do them all myself, and then I'd say, all right, the next meal you clear the table, wash the dishes, put them away because you didn't come. And it's amazing how they can hear even the dishes being stacked if they know they're going to have to do the whole thing the next meal themselves. And I don't have to, by the way, nobody likes to be screamed at. I know I don't like to be screamed at and yelled at and called. You don't have to be unkind or mean. If it's a rule, it's a rule. And then if you have a penalty, if the rule is not kept, and if that penalty costs your teenager more than coming to help with the dishes, then they'll be right there to help you out. And we've had a lot of fun. I know during the dishes, sometimes we sing a few times. Sometimes we have towel fights, and sometimes we just hurry and get them done because we want to, all of us have other things to occupy our time. But that's still a time that we can do things together and my teenagers just accept it as a way of life at our home. I was thinking that the Bible tells us to, as we work with our teenagers, as we think about having fun with them and setting rules for them and building their character, the Bible instructs us not to provoke our children to wrath. I know in Ephesians 6:4 it says, "And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." And nurture really means discipline of the Lord. And that's the whole thing I've been talking about, that all of us need rules and guidelines. And your teenagers, I think a teenager is of course trying to be an adult. And of course they're closer to being an adult than they are a child. I know many times my oldest daughter, I've told her, well, you're the guinea pig. And I have to practice. I have to find out how to do things on you. And then by the time I practice on you, I'll know when the other children are coming along. And we'll laugh together. But that's so true. It's hard to know exactly what to do, and you can't know what to do all the time. You just pray and read the Bible and try to get what God says. But I remember the other day that we were talking, and she said I think I was going over. She was going to take a trip, and I think I was naming over some of the things that she might have forgotten. And she looked at me and she says, "Mother, I'm not a little girl anymore." I think she thought of probably more things than I would have thought. And then I thought, no, she's not. And I said to her, it's really hard for me to realize you're not, because I've been used to telling you what to do and how to do it and helping you for so long. It's really hard to realize that you know as much or more than I do about what you want and getting your things ready. And we laugh, but that is so true. It's a constant reminder for me, a constant thing to remind myself that teenagers need to make decisions, even if they're the wrong ones. And they need for us to give them space to grow and make mistakes. After all, doing something wrong is the way we learn. And that's just part of life. I remember when I was growing up, one thing I learned the hard way was my mother had been given a canned ham. And that was we lived on a farm, and we'd never seen a ham in a can before. We had killed, my mother had gone up in a farm and we'd killed hogs, but nobody had ever, we'd never seen a can in ham in a can like you're used to, but we'd never seen it. So it was something really special, and this person had given it to my mother, and so we were saving it. She was saving it for a special occasion. And I remember that one day she came home and she said, "Oh, I think we'll have our ham tonight that person has given us." And we were all excited about it. And I remember she went into the kitchen to start cooking supper, and in a little while, this terrible explosion came. We had a terrible explosion, and I thought the whole house had blown up or somebody dropped a bomb on it or something. And I went in, and my mother had read the directions on the ham, and it says, "Place in oven and heat." And so instead of taking it out of the can, she just put the whole thing in the oven and heated it. And when it got hot, the whole ham exploded, blew the door off the oven, and blew the ham in thousands and millions of little pieces. We never tasted that ham. It was not a big enough piece to taste. And I remember after that, I never had any trouble at all in remembering when I got a canned ham to take it out of the can before heating. My mother had taught me that lesson the hard way. But that's the way. I just wish I could always be that willing to let my children make mistakes and then learn rather than to always interfering. One of the passages that really have meant a lot to me in that line is found in Hebrews. And God is talking to us about disciplining our children. And he says, "My son, despise thou not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth." And then he says, "If you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not?" Oh, and God is saying to us, well, we're not supposed to like chastening, but the way our children can know that we love them and they belong to us is that we do chasten them and correct them when they're wrong. And for teenagers, it doesn't have to be spanking them on the legs with a switch or a fly swatter or something. It can be denying privileges, because when a teenager breaks our rules, they should be punished. and they can get a security in being punished, and that reminds them by disciplining and punishing them that they are really our children and we are claiming them as such. I remember it goes on down to say in verse 11, "Now no chasing for the present seemeth joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." And so don't expect your children to love the correction. They won't. I don't love the correction when God corrects me. But yet God is saying to us that if we do correct them, that they will then grow into more mature Christians and grow into people that God can use more and more. And I know I've had to remind myself of that verse because personally, I don't ever like to correct my children, and I don't ever like to make them unhappy. But yet, if we truly love them, this is important. I know last Sunday we had a little 5-year-old boy in the Oriental department. His name was Thung. And he had really been a terror the whole morning. I had not kept him. Another worker had been working with him. But he had really been, he wouldn't listen. He was talking and squirming and trying to get down out of his chair and knocking his chair over and so forth. And I know finally, right before the service was over, I went over and I said to the worker, "Can I have him for a minute?" And so I took Thung and I made him look me in the eyes, which I always do with children. And I looked at him and I said, "Thung, I love you. Jesus loves you, that we cannot let you act this way. I will not let you run around the room. I must hold you on my lap." And he looked at me and he said, you love me." And I said, "Yes, I love you. Jesus loves you. But I can't let you act like this." And he looked at me, and you could just see him thinking, does she love me? And I don't know what his home life is like. I don't know if people love him or he's mistreated or anything about him other than he really is not listening and behaving in church. And so, but he calmed down and he sat there for the remaining time, sat on my lap and didn't talk. And finally, when it was over, he was leaving to go get on the bus. And I put him down on the floor and I said, "Next Sunday, then you can be good because I love you and Jesus loves you and you need to hear about Jesus." And then I said, "Bye." And he turned around, he walked away, and then he turned around and raised his arms and says, "I kiss you." And that to me, I think if you can, of course, your teenager is not going to act like that. It's easy to win affection from little children, from 5-year-old children. But teenagers need love as much as little children. And they need to know that you love them. They need to hear you say you love them, even though they do not say it back. I mean, last week, one of my sons, I have a lot of flowers in the front, and my sons have a job, so I don't usually ask them to do a lot at home. But my teenage son had gone out and on his own had spaded up all my flowers and had watered them. And it was dry, and they really needed it. And he didn't say anything. And when I walked out, I said, "Oh, somebody did my flowers." And I looked, and he was grinning. And he didn't say anything. But what he was really saying, but I knew what he was saying, it was, "I love you. I loved you enough to take the time that it was my own to do your flowers." And I think that with teenagers, we have to look for ways that they say they love us. Many times they won't. Now, some of them will. Sometimes my daughters write me notes, and they're special, that "I love you," just saying "I love you." But some won't. That little things they do mean say just as clearly, "I love you," if we'll just look for them. I know that teenagers, not only as we love them and as we care for them, we can learn to accept them. And what we've talked about before, accepting our children and realizing that they're all growing up and that we have to realize that they're not our little girls anymore. And also I found with my own children, we have to realize that they're not perfect. Sometimes we want our children to be perfect, but we're not perfect. And I guess there's nothing a child hates than to hear, "When I was your age, I never did that." That just automatically sets up a barrier. And I know I've been guilty of saying the same thing, but yet I'll have to testify to you that it's never worked, not one time in my case. Now, I'm not talking about sharing. Children love to hear you tell about things that happened when you were a little girl. And what things were like when you were a little girl. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about putting them down by trying to elevate yourself and all the things that you did right when they're doing everything wrong. I think another thing, and children love to be praised, and things they do well, they love to be praised. I know myself, it's hard to praise. I think we tend to, when things are done right, we ignore it or forget about it. And when they're done wrong, then we always bring it to their attention. But teenagers love to be praised, and they especially love praise in front of other people. We can tell their grandmothers, how they're doing. Now, I try to write every week a letter, and if my daughters are sewing something, I try to tell how well they're doing. Or if they're helping in the house, why? Because I know that the next time the grandparents, my mother writes to the children, she'll mention that special thing that they've done. And that'll, again, not only be rewarding them for what they've done right, but make them want to do it again. I think another way that we can really have fun with our teenagers is to be fun to be around. Nobody likes to be around a person who always complains and nags and gripes and is not enthusiastic. The word enthusiasm means entheos, which is filled with God. And literally, if we're unenthusiastic, then we're not filled with God, or at least we're not showing the world that we are filled with God. And so, teenagers are attracted to enthusiastic people. Now, it doesn't mean that they'll always be enthusiastic, but they are attracted to this type of person. I remember in my childhood, one person, a lady that I was around, that I don't believe I ever was around her without hearing something negative and something wrong. It just seemed that something was always wrong, and she was the mother of one of my friends that I ran around with a lot. And I know I dreaded going to their house because they had a nice house and they had enough money to be comfortable, but yet it was always something negative, and I didn't like being around her. And yet it's just a habit that we get into. And of course, if we gripe and complain, then we will rear teenagers who will do the same thing. So if we be positive, be fun to be around, never be too old. I know I tend to be a serious type person, and I tend to like to work a lot. But I know this summer, not long ago, my daughter said, well, I'd like to learn to play tennis. And my first reaction, now I don't know how to play tennis. I have never played tennis. And at 43, it seems that you're too old to learn to play tennis. And so my daughter said, well, I'd really like to play tennis. And I didn't say anything. And then my husband said, well, you could take her and play tennis. Why don't you go and play every morning, and you could probably learn. So we got up, and we went over about 6:30. From 6:30 to 7:30, we went over to the local courts. The first day, it was just terrible. I know neither my daughter and I could hit anything. And every ball was either hitting the net or hit over, and we spent half our life over trying to fish it out of the grass. And it was just, the second day or the third day we went, and we were determined to keep on until we at least learned to hit the ball. And my daughter said, this is not any fun at all. And I had to admit, well, it wasn't really, but I said, well, you want to quit? She said, do you? I said, no, we've started, so let's at least learn to hit the ball over the net. And so we kept on. Now, I think now it's been about 2 weeks since we've been going every morning. And the last few mornings, now we're not ready yet to play in the competition, but at least we're getting the ball over the net and hitting it back and forth a few times. And that's been fun. Maybe 43 is too old to go into competition, but I think, it's been fun to learn how to play tennis. I think that really, if we want to be close, we need to to be interested in the things that they like. I know a lot of times I love to read books, and many times I'll ask my children, what book have you read lately? And then I'll read it. Not because I don't have anything else to read, but because I want to know and share some of the things that are exciting for them to do. I know many times my sons will say, well, I'd like to go to the batting cages. Now, there are many things in life that I consider more exciting than driving down to the batting cages. But yet, that's important that I take them down there because it's something that they're interested in. And before long, teenagers are with us such a short time. And I know especially the girl that lives with us is getting married at Christmas, and she'll still be special to us after she's married, but then she'll have a home and a family and a life of her own, and it'll be different. It should be different because, when you leave your family, you cleave to your husband. But the special times that we've had, the special shopping trips, the special things that we've done today are memories that can never be called back again. And I try, when I'm too busy to do things with my children, I try to remind myself that soon, if the memories aren't made now, it will be impossible to go back and do them over again. And I can honestly say I don't regret anything, not even playing tennis, which is getting a little easier, I'm happy to say. Then maybe you make your own holiday special, but I've tried to always make it holiday time special. And of course these don't come real often, but like at Thanksgiving, we tend to have exactly the same food. We always have usually my mother and my brother to eat with us. On Christmas, we have a set schedule that we usually follow, and we always open our gifts on Christmas Eve because this is the way that the pattern that we've set. And I think if you will make traditions, I mentioned a minute ago that we usually have special things for birthdays. We usually not buy expensive gifts, but we usually just decorate the string crepe people around. I know this last year for my birthday, when I went home that day, the children had set up a restaurant. They had a restaurant sign on the door, and they were all dressed up in waitress and waiter uniforms, and they had sheets draped between the kitchen and the dining room, and we had soft music playing and candles, and they made my husband and I sit down, and they served our meal. And it was special because they thought of it, and they wanted to do it. And those are the type of things that I can remember. The other thing I meant to mention a minute ago is that you can always make scrapbooks, and we've tried to keep pictures and make scrapbooks of the trips that we've taken and the things that we've done, and then those are fun to look back on and again share the memories together. So with teenagers are just people. They're closer to being adults than children, even though it's hard for us to realize it. And to me, there's nothing more fun to be around. If you just don't let many times their lack of enthusiasm get you down, they will love and appreciate what you do for them. I know the first time I really appreciated my parents was when I had children of my own. And I remember when I looked at the baby that I had, I began to think about my parents and about how they had sacrificed to teach me about things of the Lord, how they had loved me, how they had given me everything that they possibly could, how they had taught me to love the Lord. And I began to think, I never really appreciated them until now. And so maybe you'll have to wait that long for your children to do the same thing for you. And most of all, I want my children to grow up to love and serve the Lord and keep Him first in their life, because I found by trial and error that this is the only way to true happiness. And this little poem just came, I memorized it years ago, but it really seems to sum up what I'm trying to say. And it says, "Isn't it funny that princes and kings and clowns that caper in sawdust rings and common folks like you and me are builders for eternity? Each is given a set of tools, a lump of clay, a book of rules, and each must choose ere life is flown to be a stumbling block or a stepping stone." And that's what I want my children to learn. I want them to learn that life with Christ is unbeatable. That life in Christ means that we can have joy and peace and fun that the world can never have, and that life in Christ is mainly living for others and letting them see Christ in you.